You stand before the bathroom mirror on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The water runs, steam rises. You lift your eyes to meet the reflection, staring back, and for a moment, just a brief, unsettling moment, you don't recognize the person looking at you. Not the face. You know the face, the tired eyes, the familiar lines. But something deeper, something behind the glass feels foreign, like looking at a photograph of someone you were told is you, but you have no memory of the moment it was taken. You brush your teeth, you adjust your collar, you smile, testing the expression, watching your lips curve upward in that practiced way, the way that says, "I'm fine," to strangers and colleagues, and even to the people who claim to know you best. But when the smile fades and you're left with just the stillness of your own gaze, a question surfaces from somewhere deep and uncomfortable. Who is this? You have a name. You have a job title printed on business cards in the desk drawer. You have preferences listed on dating profiles, hobbies mentioned at dinner parties, opinions you share when asked. But all of it feels like clothing you put on each morning, a costume, a uniform for a role you never auditioned for, but somehow got cast in anyway. There's a word for this feeling, though. Most people who experience it don't have language for it yet. It's the sensation of being an imposter in your own life. Not the kind of imposter syndrome they talk about at work, where you fear you're not qualified enough. This is different. This is the creeping suspicion that everything you are is a performance, that beneath the scripts you've memorized and the gestures you've perfected, there's nothing. Or worse, there's someone you've never met. You laugh when you're not amused. You nod when you want to shake your head. You chose your university major because it made sense, married the person who checked the right boxes, built a life that looks correct on paper. And somewhere along the way, you lost track of where the performance ends and where you were supposed to begin. The most terrifying moments are the quiet ones. When you're alone in your apartment and there's no one to perform, for no one whose expectations you need to read and mirror and meet. You stand in the kitchen trying to decide what to eat for dinner, and you realize you don't know what you want. Not because there are too many options, but because the question itself feels foreign. What do you want? When was the last time that question had a real answer? You've been living someone else's life for so long that you've forgotten how to live your own. And the price of admission to this endless performance has been nothing less than your soul. Tonight we pull back the curtain. We step into the wings where the real you has been waiting quiet and patient for someone to finally remember they exist. You've spent years wondering what's wrong with you, why you feel so bland, so beige, so utterly without substance. Friends call you easygoing. Family says you're accommodating. But you know the truth behind those kind words. You have no spine, no center, no authentic opinion that couldn't be swayed by the slightest breeze of someone else's preference. You blame yourself. You think it's a character flaw, weakness, cowardice. But it isn't. What you're experiencing isn't a personality defect. It's a survival strategy so sophisticated, so deeply embedded, that you've forgotten it was ever a choice. And here's the truth that might change everything when you were a child. Being yourself was dangerous, not dramatically dangerous, not the kind of danger that leaves visible scars. The danger was subtler, more insidious. It lived in the tightening of your mother's jaw when you expressed excitement about something she found frivolous. It lived in your father's silence when you showed interest in anything that deviated from his vision of who you should become. It lived in the praise that flooded in when you performed correctly, and the cold withdrawal when you didn't. You learn the equation early. Be different, be yourself, express your authentic impulses, and you risk disapproval, criticism, emotional abandonment. Follow the script mirror, the expectations become what they need you to be, and you receive love, attention, safety. For a child, this isn't really a choice. A child cannot survive without attachment, cannot develop without connection. The need for belonging is as fundamental as the need for food for air. So, when the choice becomes be authentic or be loved, the child chooses love. Every single time. They have to. You sacrificed your authenticity at the altar of attachment. And you did it so young, so completely, that you don't even remember what you gave away. Now you're exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't touch. Because being a chameleon requires constant vigilance. You walk into every room scanning for cues. What do they expect? What version of me do they need? How should I stand? It's speak, laugh, react to make this interaction smooth. You're reading faces like code, adjusting your behavior in real time, shape-shifting to match the emotional temperature of every space you enter. It's not conscious anymore, it's automatic. But automation doesn't mean it's effortless. Your nervous system is running calculations every moment you're around other people. Who do I need to be right now? What will keep me safe? What will earn approval? What will prevent rejection? You come home and collapse. Not from the work you did, but from the constant performance of being. From holding a shape that isn't yours. From smiling with muscles that wanted to frown. Agreeing with a voice that wanted to object. Laughing at jokes that made you feel hollow. And in the silence of your own space, when there's no one left to perform for you, feel it. That terrifying emptiness. That sense that if you peel back all the layers of who you've been for other people, there might be nothing underneath. But you're wrong about that. There is something underneath. Someone. They've been there all along, quiet in the dark, waiting. Not gone, just hidden, protected, preserved in a place so deep that even the cruelest expectations couldn't reach them. The question isn't whether that true self still exists. The question is whether you're ready to go looking for them. There's a moment in every child's development that determines whether they will grow up knowing themselves or spending their entire adult life searching for who they were supposed to be. It happens quietly, without ceremony, in the countless small interactions between a young, unformed self and the world that receives it. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott spent his career studying this moment. He called it the formation of the false self, and what he discovered was this: when a child's authentic impulses, their raw, genuine expressions of desire, curiosity, anger, joy, when these are consistently met with rejection, correction, or dismissal, the child doesn't simply learn to hide those impulses. They create an entirely separate self to interface with the world, a diplomatic self, a performing self, a self designed not to express truth, but to ensure survival. The false self is brilliant. It studies what gets rewarded. It learns which smiles earn affection, which achievements generate pride, which versions of you make the adults in the room relax. It molds itself to fit the shape of their expectations so perfectly that eventually even you can't see the seams. And here's the tragic beauty of it. The false self isn't the enemy. It's a guardian. When your true self, that raw, authentic core of impulses and desires and genuine feeling, when that self wasn't safe to show the false self, stepped forward and said, "I'll handle this. You hide. I'll deal with them." It put on the mask so that something real in you could survive untouched. The problem is that masks, when worn long enough, begin to fuse with skin. You were a good student because that's what they valued, even though your hands itched to draw, to build, to create something that had no grade attached to it. You were polite and quiet because emotional expression made them uncomfortable, even though your chest was full of storms. You chose the practical career, the respectable partner, the appropriate life, because deviating from the script felt like stepping off a cliff into nothing, and the false self kept you safe, kept you functioning, kept you connected to the people whose love you needed. But somewhere in the transaction, the true self, that essential core of who you actually are, got buried so deep that you forgot where you put it. You forgot it existed at all. This is how you end up successful by every external measure and dead inside. This is how you achieve everything your parents wanted and feel nothing. This is how you build a life that looks perfect in photographs and feels like living in a museum of someone else's dreams. The families where this happens most completely have a particular architecture. Psychologists call it enmeshment. In these families, there are no individuals. There's only we. There are no boundaries between where one person ends and another begins. Your body is treated as an extension of your mother's body. Your feelings are treated as symptoms of your father's mood. Your preferences don't exist separately from theirs. You're cold, put on a sweater, your mother says, on a warm afternoon, and you learn that your body's signals can't be trusted, that her perception of your experience is more real than your actual experience. You don't like that you like this. They tell you at the dinner table, and you learn that your preferences are negotiable, that what you feel isn't as important as what they've decided you should feel. You lose the ability to hear yourself. The skill of interoception, that capacity to sense your own internal signals, hunger, fatigue, desire, discomfort, begins to atrophy. You only know how to listen to external commands. What should I want? Check the room? What should I feel? Read their faces? Who should I be? Wait for instructions. In these families, your parents look at you and don't see a separate person. They see a project, an extension, a second chance. They have unlived lives inside them, dreams that died, ambitions that failed, and you become the vessel into which they pour all that unfulfilled longing. Your father wanted to be a doctor, but couldn't afford medical school, so you must become a doctor. Your mother dreamed of being beautiful and admired, so you must win beauty pageants, must marry, must reflect glory back onto her. You're not raised as a person with your own trajectory. You're raised as a solution to their regrets. They don't love you for who you are. They love you for what you can become, for how well you perform the role they've written. And you feel this even if you can't articulate it. You feel that their affection is conditional, that it flows toward you when you succeed at being their dream and withdraws when you deviate. So you learn to stay in character, always. There's a particular psychological pattern that emerges from this. They call it good child syndrome. You become pathologically afraid of disappointing others. Your entire sense of worth gets tied to your ability to meet expectations, to fulfill needs, to be useful, impressive, successful in the exact ways that earn approval. If no one needs you, you feel worthless. If no one praises you, you feel invisible. Your internal compass doesn't point toward what you want or what feels right. It points toward what will make them proud, what will prevent their disappointment, what will keep the flow of conditional love coming. You lose the ability to make decisions based on your own desires. Every choice becomes a calculation. What will they think? What's the safe option? What keeps everyone happy? You can't order food at a restaurant without wondering what choice seems most appropriate. You can't choose a hobby without evaluating whether it's impressive enough. You can't even relax without feeling guilty that you should be achieving something. The scripts they handed you are everywhere. The script that says your value comes from productivity. The script that says love must be earned through performance. The script that says your feelings are less important than maintaining peace. The script that says who you are isn't good enough, but who you could become might be acceptable. There are different versions of these scripts, different roles assigned. Some of you were cast as the caretaker, taught that your worth comes from sacrificing yourself for others, that your needs are selfish, that love means disappearing so others can shine. Some of you were cast as the star, taught that you must excel, when that anything less than exceptional is failure, that your value is measured in trophies and credentials and the envy of others. Some of you were cast as the martyr, taught that suffering is noble, that ease is suspicious, that if you're not struggling, you must not be trying hard enough. You learned to find identity in your wounds, to feel most real when you're enduring something difficult, to distrust happiness as something shallow people chase. And some of you were cast as the invisible one, taught that taking up space is rude, that having opinions is aggressive, that the best thing you can be is unobtrusive, agreeable, easy. You learn to make yourself small, to have no needs, to be proud of how little you require from others. These scripts run deep. They're not just ideas. They're wired into your nervous system, embedded in your reflexes. You don't choose to perform them. You just do. Automatically, the way your heart beats without instruction. And here's what makes this particularly cruel. The better you perform the script, the more praise you receive. The more you abandon yourself, the more the world tells you you're doing it right. You get straight A's for becoming someone you're not. You get promoted for prioritizing everyone else's needs above your own. You get called mature, responsible, selfless, easy to work with. All the rewards flow toward the false self. And the true self, that stubborn, authentic core, gets nothing but neglect. So it goes quiet. It stops knocking. It retreats into a small room in the back of your psyche and waits, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, waiting for the day when the false self finally cracks, when the performance becomes unsustainable, when you wake up at 25 or 35 or 45 and realize you've been living a life that doesn't belong to you. That moment, that crisis, it has a name too. It's called the collapse of the false self. And it feels like everything falling apart, but it isn't. It's everything that was false finally breaking so that something real can emerge. You've been taught to hate the falseness in yourself, to feel ashamed of your inability to be authentic, to despise your people-pleasing tendencies, to see your adaptability as weakness. But what if you've been looking at it wrong this whole time? The false self isn't your enemy. It never was. Think of it as a spacesuit. When you were a child, you found yourself in an environment that was toxic to your authentic self. The atmosphere was wrong, the pressure unbearable. Your genuine impulses, your real feelings, your actual preferences couldn't survive exposure to that climate. So, your psyche did something remarkable. It built you protective gear. It created a self that could function in that hostile environment while keeping the most vulnerable parts of you sealed away, safe preserved. The false self is the reason you survived. It's the reason that somewhere inside you, beneath all the performance and adaptation, there's still a true self at all. Without that protective layer, the person you actually are would have been crushed, erased, corrected out of existence entirely. So, first, before anything else, you need to thank it. That diplomatic mask you've been wearing, that chameleon ability to shift and adjust it, saved you. It kept your core intact when showing that core would have gotten it destroyed. The false self has been standing guard at the door of your authenticity for years, maybe decades, keeping it sealed in a place where the cruelty and expectation and conditional love couldn't reach. It did its job perfectly. The problem isn't that you developed a false self. The problem is that you're still wearing the spacesuit even though you're no longer in space. You're still in protective mode even though the threat has changed. You're still performing for an audience that exists mostly in your memory now. But here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the tragedy transforms into possibility. Because you were never allowed to be yourself. Because your authentic desires were suppressed before they could fully form. Because you spent your entire developmental years adapting to others instead of discovering yourself. You are in a very real sense unmade, undefined, a blank canvas. And that's not emptiness, that's potential. Most people inherit themselves. They become who they are through a combination of genetics, early environment, cultural conditioning, and habit. They never question it. They just are. But you've been living as someone else for so long that you have the rarest of opportunities. You get to choose who you become, consciously, deliberately, with full agency. You get to create yourself from scratch. This is the gift hidden inside the wound. While others are trapped in patterns they can't see, limited by identities they never examined, you're free, terrifyingly free. You have no idea who you are, which means you could be anyone. You could become anything. The person you were supposed to be is still waiting to be discovered, invented, brought into being. Most people don't get a second childhood. Most people don't get to experience the world with fresh eyes, to try things without the weight of an established identity, to discover preferences as if for the first time. But you do, right now. At whatever age you are, you get to start over. That feeling of emptiness you've been carrying, that sense that there's nothing inside, it's not absence. It's space, room to grow into, permission to experiment, freedom to fail and try again without contradicting some fixed sense of self. The true self that got buried isn't dead. It's dormant, hibernating, waiting in a state of suspended animation for conditions to change, for safety to arrive, for someone for you to finally come looking. And when you do find it, when you begin the excavation, it won't emerge fully formed. It will be young, underdeveloped, the age it was when it went into hiding. If you had to become false at 7 years old, your true self is still 7. It will need time to grow up to catch up to your current age. It will make mistakes. It will be messy and impulsive and sometimes embarrassing. It will want things that don't make sense and reject things that seem perfectly reasonable. And that's exactly as it should be. Because authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. And real things are always a little rough around the edges, a little unpredictable, a little too much or not quite enough. Real things grow. They change. They contradict themselves. You've been a masterpiece of performance art for long enough. Now it's time to become a rough draft of something true. The journey back to yourself has a name in psychology. They call it individuation, the process of separating who you are from who you were told to be, of drawing a boundary between your life and the lives of everyone who had plans for you, of becoming finally an individual. It's not a gentle process. It's archaeology. You're digging through layers of sediment, years of accumulated expectations and performances and adaptations, trying to find the artifacts of your original self buried underneath. And like all excavations, it requires patience, precision, and a willingness to get your hands dirty. The first step is detective work. You're looking for clues, fragments of the person you were before you learned to be someone else. This means going back in memory to the earliest moments you can access, before the correcting began, before the shaping. What did you love when you were 5 years old, before anyone told you that love was impractical or silly or wrong? Maybe you spent hours arranging rocks by color. Maybe you made up elaborate stories for your toys. Maybe you stared at clouds and felt something unnamed and enormous moving through your chest. Those weren't random behaviors. They were your true self showing you what it loved, what it needed, what made it feel alive. Ask yourself, what did I do when I forgot time existed? What activity made me so absorbed that hours passed like minutes? What did I have to be told to stop doing again and again because I wouldn't stop on my own? Those compulsions, those natural gravitations, they're breadcrumbs leading back to who you actually are. And then ask the harder question, what did I want that I was told I couldn't have? What did I reach for that got slapped away, metaphorically or literally? What dreams did I mention once and never mention again because of the look on their faces, the tone of their response, the silence that followed? Those forbidden desires didn't disappear. They just went underground, and they're still there waiting, wondering if it's finally safe to come back up. But memory alone isn't enough. You need new data. You need to conduct experiments on yourself to test what you actually like versus what you've been told you should like. This means doing things that feel transgressive even if they're objectively harmless. Eat a food your family always said was disgusting. Listen to music your parents hated. Watch a movie in a genre you were taught to look down on. Wear a color you were told didn't suit you. And here's the important part. Pay attention to your body's response, not your mind's judgment. Does your nervous system relax or tighten? Do you feel expansion or contraction? That's real information. That's your authentic self, sending signals. You'll be shocked how much of what you think you prefer is just programming. You'll order your coffee the same way for 10 years and then realize you don't actually like it that way. You just ordered it that way once, and it became routine. You'll discover you hate your job, not because the work is bad, but because you chose the field to please someone who isn't even in your life anymore. This is uncomfortable work, because as you start to listen to yourself, you'll hear things that contradict the narrative you've been performing. You'll discover you're not as selfless as you've been pretending to be, not as passionate about the things you've claimed to care about, not as content with the life you've built. And then comes the hard part, the part that separates those who stay stuck from those who actually change. You have to practice being authentic in front of other people. You have to let them see the real opinions, the real preferences, the real you, even when it disappoints them. Start small. Microscopically small. When someone asks if you liked the movie and you didn't say, "It wasn't really for me," instead of, "Yeah, it was great." When someone suggests a restaurant and you'd rather go somewhere else, say, "Actually, could we try this place instead?" When someone assumes you'll do something and you don't want to say, "I need to check my schedule," instead of automatic yes. Watch what happens. Notice the fear that rises up, the certainty that they'll be angry, reject you, withdraw their love. And then notice that most of the time they don't. Most of the time they just say, "Okay," and move on. Because the catastrophic consequences you've been imagining, the ones that were real when you were a child and actually dependent on those people's approval, they're not real anymore. You're not a child anymore. You have your own resources, your own income, your own home. You can survive their disappointment. In fact, you have to learn to survive their disappointment if you're ever going to be free. This is the alchemy of healing, turning guilt into information. When you choose yourself and feel guilty about it, that guilt isn't a sign you've done something wrong. In the beginning, it's a sign you've done something right. It means you've violated the old programming. You've stepped outside the script. The guilt is just the alarm system of the false self panicking because it's losing control. You have to learn to sit with that guilt, to let it be there without letting it dictate your choices, to say, "I see you, I know you're scared, but we're doing this anyway." Over time, as you practice choosing yourself and the world doesn't end, the guilt will quiet. The alarm will stop going off. Your nervous system will learn that authenticity isn't dangerous anymore. But the most crucial work is philosophical. You need to audit your values, every single one of them. Take out a piece of paper and write down everything you believe about how life should be lived. Success means this. Good people do that. Happiness requires this. Love looks like that. Write it all down, and then go through the list, item by item, and ask, is this mine or is this my mother's voice, my father's expectation, my culture's assumption, my religion's teaching? If I had never met any of these people, never been exposed to these ideas, would I still believe this? Some values will remain. Some are genuinely yours, but others you'll find you're carrying around like someone else's luggage. Heavy bags full of beliefs that were packed for you, that you've been dragging through your life out of habit, out of loyalty, out of fear of what it would mean to set them down. Set them down. There's a creature that lives in the ocean that you need to know about. The crab. As it grows, its shell does not. The hard protective exterior that kept it safe when it was small becomes a prison as it gets larger. The shell that once fit perfectly begins to press against its expanding body, restricting movement, limiting growth, slowly suffocating the life inside. So, the crab does something that looks like suicide but is actually salvation. It molts. It cracks open its own armor and pulls itself out, leaving behind the shell that protected it. And for a period of time, days, sometimes it is completely vulnerable. Soft-bodied, exposed. Any predator could destroy it. Any current could dash it against the rocks. But if it doesn't molt, it dies anyway. Crushed inside its own protection, strangled by safety. You are that crab. The false self is the shell, and you've outgrown it. You can feel it, can't you? The way it presses against you when you try to expand, the way it restricts your breathing, the way it's kept you safe, but has also kept you small. It's time to crack it open, to pull yourself out into the terrible, gorgeous vulnerability of being seen as you actually are. Will it be dangerous? Yes. Will some people reject this softer, truer version of you? Probably. Will you lose relationships that were only built on the performance? Almost certainly. But you'll also discover something you've never experienced before. The feeling of being loved for who you are, not for who you pretend to be. The relief of not having to maintain the performance every waking moment. The shocking lightness of telling the truth. The strange joy of disappointing someone and surviving it. The person in the mirror will start to look familiar. Not all at once, gradually, like someone coming into focus. You'll catch glimpses at first. A real laugh that surprises you. A strong opinion that emerges without calculation. A choice made from desire instead of duty. And slowly over months and years, that stranger will become someone you recognize. Someone you might even like. Take off the costume. Wash away the stage makeup. Let yourself be unpolished, unfinished, imperfect, and utterly finally real. The world has enough performances. Enough plastic perfection. Enough people living lives that look right but feel empty. What the world needs, what it has always needed, is the specific, irreplaceable, slightly messy truth of you. Not who you were supposed to be. Not who they needed you to become. Just you. Raw and real and absolutely worth knowing.